This is an ad from a 2008 climate awareness campaign featuring U.S. Senators and nemesis Nancy Pelosi and Newt Gingrich. Pelosi, the current Democratic Speaker of the House, and Gingrich, a former Speaker of the House for Republicans, sat down on a couch in front of the halls of Congress and claimed that although they
don't always see eye to eye,
they did
agree our country must take action to address climate change.
In the midst of the crushing political gridlock of the time, two power brokers of American politics found some consensus on climate change. But this consensus on climate change and environmentalism across the political spectrum isn't new. From Nixon,
we can make 1972 the best year ever for environmental progress,
to Bush,
human activities are changing the atmosphere,
to Clinton.
Global climate change, clearly, is one of the most important of those challenges.
The U.S. has often painted itself as leaders in the quest to address environmental destruction. And yet, despite the impassioned speeches from political figureheads and some consensus across 50 years, the U.S. has few results to show for it. Instead, the U.S. has propped up fossil fuel giants, watered down global climate agreements, and failed to pass any ambitious climate legislation that adequately addresses the scope of the crisis. And today, we are still seeing the same idealization of American climate leadership with the Biden administration.
Well, the United States is not only back at the table, but hopefully leading by the power of our example.
But of course, the country's historic and current actions tell a different story. Here's why the US never was and never will be a climate leader. This video was made possible by the people who support me on Patreon. Get early access to all my videos by becoming an OCC Patreon supporter. After 4 years of outright denial and war on climate action during the Trump presidency, some hoped that Biden's inauguration might provide at least some much-needed relief and momentum for the climate justice movement. But for anyone paying attention to the federal government's track record on climate change over the last 34 years since climate scientist James Hansen laid out the threat we face in the halls of the Capitol building, they might have realized that there is very little chance of Biden sharply cutting emissions by 57% by 2030. The only emissions path the US can take if it is to do its part in staying within 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. That's because ever since the Industrial Revolution, the United States has been the king of fossil fuel emissions. But it wasn't until the mid-1970s that governing bodies really started to do anything about climate change. Under the Nixon administration, the Environmental Protection Agency and a slew of environmental protection acts were quickly established to crack down on flagrant pollution. But unfortunately, that momentum was quickly lost under the neoliberal backlash of the Reagan era. The EPA was stripped of its authority and defunded, and polluters were left unenforced under the banner of deregulation. It wasn't until the Clinton administration, under strong recommendations by climate scientists, that the White House committed the country to lowering greenhouse gas emissions to 1990s levels by 2000. Just a quick look at the numbers reveals how deeply Clinton's initiative failed. Again and again, Congress and the White House have attempted to pass climate legislation, from the 2003 Cap and Trade Climate Stewardship Act to the American Clean Energy Leadership Act of 2009. And most every time, they've been stuffed or watered down to the point of ineffectiveness. And now, in 2022, almost 2 years into Biden's presidency, there's still little to show in terms of US climate action. Again and again, Biden has called for urgent climate action.
Put climate change at the center of our domestic, national security, and foreign policy.
He is certainly taking more steps than his predecessor, but his administration seems to be talking the climate talk a lot more than walking the climate action walk. If Biden wanted to, there are a lot of executive actions his office could take right now that would quickly signal an end to fossil fuels. Biden has the power to halt new oil pipeline projects, end all fossil fuel leases on federal lands, and reinstate the crude oil export ban. In short, the White House can hamstring the fossil fuel industry right now and at least set the US on the path towards rapid emissions reductions. But Biden seems reluctant to take those actions. That's because America is still beholden to the profits of fossil fuel giants like ExxonMobil. As the director of the Energy Justice Program, Jean Su, notes in an article from the New Republic, the supposed leader of the free world is still an oil and gas president. Executive actions like Biden's new light bulb efficiency standards just nibble at the edges of a much larger problem: the fossil fuel industry. Indeed, these kinds of small wins, while important, distract from the crucial work of ending fossil fuel emissions. America will never fully decarbonize by switching to efficient light bulbs. Only a complete dismantling of our fossil fuel infrastructure will achieve that. Outside the White House, Republican and Democrat stonewalling has made that pretty much impossible. The Democrats' big-ticket climate bill is treading water and is being made even less ambitious as Democrats like Joe Manchin, who one ExxonMobil lobbyist called the kingmaker of their stalling operations, hollow out the bill to the point of ineffectiveness. And partisan compromise has led to the watered-down, recently passed infrastructure package, which focuses much more on car-oriented infrastructure than public transportation and low-carbon transportation options. This complete inability to pass any sort of climate legislation at a scale commensurate to the crisis we face is due in part to decades of fossil fuel-funded climate misinformation and heaps of oil money filling the pockets of American politicians across the political spectrum. Fossil fuel capitalism has brought prosperity to those in power, so they have a vested interest to do the bare minimum when it comes to emissions reductions. Not only has the US failed to become a climate leader within its borders, it now exports its failures across the world, all while claiming to be its savior. The self-identified leader of the free world is doing anything but leading when it comes to global climate actions. From propping up neoliberal regimes that hamstring public safety nets and climate resiliency programs, to destabilizing whole countries through decades of war, the United States has been a formidable obstacle to climate justice. And on the climate diplomacy side, with each Conference of Parties, also known as COP, the United States, along with its fellow countries in the imperial core, refuse to acknowledge the emissions and climate debt they owe to the imperial periphery. From COP15 in Copenhagen that fell apart when the US refused to accept Bolivia's and other Global South countries' cries for climate reparations, to the most recent COP26 talks where one anonymous negotiator characterized the US stance on funding climate loss and damage in the imperial periphery as a quote-unquote immovable object, the US has been a constant thorn in the sides of countries like Bolivia and Tuvalu, who've demanded that rich countries like the US repay the emissions debt they've accumulated over the last 3 centuries. In addition, it's hard for the US to be a climate leader when it continues not to act. From flip-flopping back and forth on the Paris Agreement depending on who sits in the Oval Office, to its continued failure to pass comprehensive climate legislation, the US's urging of other countries, especially countries in the periphery that the US has plundered for centuries, to reject fossil fuels and embrace renewables is a bit hypocritical. As Eric Levitz puts it in an article for Intelligencer, if rich countries do not treat warming as a serious issue, they cannot expect poor ones to do so either. The US only represents 13% of global carbon dioxide emissions. Its failure to act doesn't spell the end, and that gives me hope. The world can and should move on without us to address climate change. If the ruling class politicians lining the halls of Congress and the White House have their way, it seems that the US will continue to fail on climate action, which means that we need to work towards 2 movements. First, an anti-imperialist, anti-fossil fuel, anti-capitalist climate revolution must seize the US. This means implementing strong agrarian, transportation, healthcare, and economic measures that foreground climate action, the end to all systems of oppression, and the well-being of people living both inside and outside the borders of the United States. These domestic actions must be coupled with the funneling of the massive profits that have been gained through centuries of plunder of the Global South back into their hands as a form of climate reparations. But while we in the US build the power necessary to make that happen, the second movement must also take root. A parallel leftist climate revolution in peripheral countries. In all likelihood, a climate revolution will happen first in the imperial periphery and spread into the core. So it's countries like Bolivia, like even the communist regions of the Philippines, that are the true climate vanguards. Those of us in the imperial core need to do all we can to bring about the end of imperial power. But we also need to look to our comrades in the imperial periphery for leadership if we are to liberate both ourselves and the planet from destruction. Unfortunately, videos like these, while very important, do terribly with the YouTube algorithm and sponsors don't want to touch them. But there is a way you can help. Becoming an OCC Patreon supporter helps Our Changing Climate stay afloat and independent. As an OCC patron, you'll not only gain early access to videos, but also special behind-the-scenes updates and a members-only Discord channel. In addition, each month, my supporters vote on an environmental group that I then donate a portion of my monthly revenue to. Patreon supporters are the financial backbone of the Our Changing Climate operation. Without them, I wouldn't be able to take creative risks and dive into difficult topics. So if you want to help keep this channel alive or are feeling generous, head over to patreon.com/ourchangingclimate or use the link in the description and become an OCC patron. If you're not interested or aren't financially able to, then no worries. You can help the channel out by subscribing, liking the video, and commenting. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I will see you in 2 weeks.